Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and program stream at windowsontheworld.net. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Windows on the World. I had a few technical problems there, a few minutes late tonight. It's something to do with this broadcaster. My microphone froze up, but I'm here now. So I had a couple of false starts there. However, we're following on from the shows of the last couple of weeks, and I'm going to expand on this knowledge of these so-called secret societies. Now, tonight and over the past few weeks, we've been looking and are going to look at the new age of illusion, the cult of unreality, the cult of I am, the cult of the vacuous and the willfully stupid. Yes, it is a cult, and anything outside of this cult is now hate speak, or it's going to be demonized, and demonization is something that's at the heart of this. Now, before we start the show, I want to talk about our talks, the bigger picture. We've got several lined up. We're going to be at the Harlequin Fair next Sunday, and we're going to be there with Piers Corbin. We're going to have Sandy Adams and myself, and we're going to be talking about the information which we have been putting out for the last several years, and very successfully our last few talks. I've just heard from Martin. Thanks, Martin. I think you are our administrator at the present, because I've had two false starts trying to get the show going. It's a bit awful, actually, because I was ready. 10 minutes I was waiting, patiently, looking at the countdown, we're going on exactly 9 o'clock. We'll be out, going live at 9, and then it didn't work. So that's twice it didn't work. So I'm going to switch off everything else what we don't need, which is basically things like telephones, and get them out of the way, because we're now going to look at the bigger picture and the role of so-called secret societies and the belief systems which are based on global domination. Now, we looked at the corruption of knowledge through self-promotion. I'm just going to get rid of this. The corruption of knowledge through self-promotion, the real role of the secret societies, and the use of narcissists to promote agendas. Now, this is a really big thing, the use of narcissists. We see that everywhere. I'm going to go into what's behind all this, giving it a kind of philosophical kind of flavour. So basically the corruption of knowledge through self-promotion, and who's behind that? There must be someone behind it, because nothing happens by accident, does it? The use of narcissism to promote agendas, the role of useful idiots, we're going to look at that. I think I'm tying everything together here. The role of social Darwinism, the use of religion, and the importance of ritual. The need to take power on behalf of the state through a self-appointed priest class. And we've looked at the origins of the priest class, where that actually came from. And we've also talked about it in how it's actually applied. In other words, you've got this belief system which is projected down from above, which limits everyone's capabilities. Only 1%, half of 1% of the population are taught to think. And those that are taught to think in a certain way by the priest class. So we've got this completely manufactured view of reality, and what we've got now are people who are completely outside any form of philosophical thought. And we've been looking at that in the last couple of weeks and where that actually came from. The importance of the supernatural and keeping it away from the masses. That's another thing that's really important. Doing this by ridicule and promotion of humanism and Gaia, the one world religion, with a corporate police state and billionaires dictating to puppets who think that they're in power. And we see a lot of those, don't we? We see them all over the news. Now let's go into some really, really historical background stuff now. And this is going to be quite important as to what we're talking about. So do pay attention to this first bit. Now, in the book of Genesis, after Cain kills Abel, God curses Cain to a life of toil and wandering. But when Cain laments that his own life is in danger, God promises to protect him. The Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who came upon him would kill him. That's Genesis 4:15. The manifesto of an order that we're going to look at, is going to be quite important in respect to what I've just said, and that order is the Rosicrucian Order, which was started in the 1600s but originated much before that. We've talked about the original documentation of the Rosicrucians, which kind of released in 1610, Forma Fraternitatis and Confessio, and these documents basically propounded a new way of looking at the world, and we looked at the idea of religion and philosophy. This is the ancient doctrine. The ancient doctrine is of religion and philosophy. Then it went into religion and basically science, and now it's science and politics. And we can see that with the social engineering that's going on. We've covered that in the last two shows, the cult of reality. And we've also looked at this new age of narcissism, which is very important in all this. So basically, we've got this biblical idea, and we've got these two brothers, Cain and Abel. And we're going to take that a little bit of a step further into the manifestations of the Rosicrucian Order. Now, we're going to talk particularly about this new manifesto of the Rosicrucians, because this is where it's changed a lot. And this was in the 1800s. And a chap who called himself Max Heindel, it wasn't his real name, but he lived from 1865 to 1919. And he was under instruction of the elder brother. The elder brother, of course, is the hidden person we're not allowed to see, who is an initiate of this Rosicrucian Order. Now, the two shows we've done, the New Age of Illusion and the Cult of Unreality, and we're entering here the arena of black magic and deception, basically masquerading as something else, something that it's not. Now, the philosophical view of reality gave way to the New Age and the New Thought movement in the late 1800s. We're recapping on what we've done over the last couple of weeks because it's going to be very important. It then moved into the scientific social engineering of psychology, and we talk about that a lot on the shows, the psychological society. Basically the use of psychology and psychological manipulation against the masses. And then we go from this social engineering of psychology, we're going then into Luciferianism, and the result of that is the disintegration of all knowledge into this cult of narcissism and willful ignorance and overt control by the followers of this cult. And it is a cult, and we talk about this cult in many different ways, but tonight we're going to go into the historical background of it. So the solution, as we said before, to all this has to be natural law and philosophical thought, along with no-nonsense common sense. And the ability to think coherently has been lost. So it's now up to those who have not been infected by this mind virus, and this is part of what I'm going to be talking about tonight, to keep secret knowledge of the blatantly obvious going. So I'm going to call it the secret knowledge of the blatantly obvious, which is basically how things really work for those who can revert to rational and philosophical thought. So we're following on from those shows, the Cult of Unreality and the New Age of Illusion, and we discuss some other brief quotes from Manly P. Hall's Secret Destiny of America. Now, I'd like to follow on with what the more forward-thinking people have been saying for a long time about what can in reality be termed the cult of nothing, masquerading as the new age of enlightenment. So stick with it, because we're in for quite a ride here. Now, through the demonism of the Middle Ages, this is the Manly P. Hall quote, though the demonism of the Middle Ages seems to have disappeared, there is abundant evidence that in many forms of modern thought, especially the so-called prosperity psychology, willpower building, metaphysics, and the systems of high-pressure salesmanship, black magic has merely passed through a metamorphosis, and although its name be changed, its nature remains the same. That was Manly P. Hall from The Secret Teachings of All Ages, 1928. Now, the reason I've mentioned this quote a few times is it ties in perfectly to what's actually going on, and he had some foresight into what was going on. Of course, he was made an honorary Freemason. He wasn't actually a Freemason, Manly P. Hall, but because he knew so much about Freemasonry and he'd done so much research, they made him an honorary Freemason. Now, Manly P. Hall's knowledge of esoteric subjects was fascinating, his observations about the narcissistic cult of me and these self-appointed self-help gurus, which we talked about last week, kicked off the New Thought and the New Age movement. Now, we talked about those in the previous shows. Now, it's prophetic and also way ahead of its time, as the book was first published, as I said, in 1928. Now, this ties into the new manifesto of the RC, and it seems that there are now 3 types of people as stated in the manifesto, and we'll be looking at that. Now, this is where it starts to get very, very interesting, because I've managed to sort of condense this down to something that people can understand, hopefully, so do stick with it. I'm just going to go into chat to see who's there and what's happening. Yes. Yeah, there's people in there. That's great. Okay, so yeah, I think we have action in the chat box. I'll put evening in again, so it's all live. Okay, so that's great. Now, so we're looking at here this biblical idea, the sons of Cain joined with the sons of Seth. Now, this is actually part of this new manifesto of the Rosicrucians, which was written by this guy Max Heindel, who we're going to get into a little bit later. So, according to this new manifesto of the Rosicrucians, the sons of Cain joined with the sons of Seth to rule over the sons of Abel, whom the brotherhood believe are pliant and unempowered, or can be easily disempowered. Now, what we're doing here is using this as an allegory for what's going on. Now, this is not what I believe, it's what they believe, and it's what's in their manifesto. So whether this is completely twisted logic or not, it doesn't really matter. There are people behind the scenes initiated into this who actually believe it. So let's just say that again. The sons of Cain joined with the sons of Seth to rule over the sons of Abel. That's going to be really important. Now, this belief explains the cult of narcissism and the promotion of the ego, as all this helps to promote the agenda of world domination by this sect of Luciferian believers. This belief by assumption and basically arrogance. And behind this, of course, is a more organised and very powerful network. And we can call them useful idiots or we can call them globalists. I don't think it really matters. But when it comes down to it, what we're going to find out, I think, through all this is it's a sure recipe for disaster. And this can be seen in the total unbalance of the present world order. So the promotion of the useless and shallow and the suppression of the thinking. This is actually what's going on. So the thinking minority are being severely repressed in favour of this useless and shallow kind of mentality, which is being promoted for a very good reason. So the allowed corridor of opinion and the lies masquerading as fact are or could be aligned with this belief system, which I'll be outlining tonight. Now, the reason any of this is important, right, is that at the beginning of the 20th century, the RC, or the Rosicrucians, looked again for, it says here, this is their stuff, not mine, for an eligible candidate to make part of its teachings public to stop materialism. Now, this is really interesting. So if you're going to stop materialism, how do you do that? Well, the New Age and Agenda 21 and what's called Agenda 2030. Now, the UN, which is merely a global implementation of what may be called secret societies or even lobbying groups, right? That's what the UN really is. It's a big, kindly front for this implementation. And people think the UN's great. Of course, there's UNICEF and UNESCO. And people think these organisations are benevolent. You know, they're philanthropic. And anyone who listens to the show will know really what they're about. We've done a lot of shows on the UN, the origins of the UN and the New Age. Go and have a look on the website and look at all the links in there. Quite astonishing. Now, basically, these lobbying groups and these secret societies are calling for this new order, which is being implemented all around us. We've looked at the original Rosicrucians. Tonight we're going to go further into some other organisations. The Martinists, for example. who are an offshoot of the Rosicrucians, and Ellis Cohen, that's Eluscoen. And this is very interesting stuff, and I think it starts to reveal what is actually going on behind these agendas that are being played out, because we've covered the agendas in great deal of kind of detail, really. We've gone into great detail about what these agendas are about and what's being enforced, but let's go behind it. Let's try and look at the philosophy and the control system behind this. We've looked at the New Age, we've looked at Blavatsky, Madame Blavatsky, Alice Bailey, the Lucis Trust, which is completely supported by the UN. I was talking to someone, I found myself next to somebody who was working for the Lucis Trust, actually, and he wasn't very happy about what I'd said, because I'd basically said the UN is forming global governance implemented at a local level, and it's a Luciferian agenda. And he said, well, I work for the Lucis Trust. So that was an interesting conversation. Well, not really. He backed off a bit. He got a bit kind of defensive, quite understandably, really. Now, the thing is, this Ellis Cohen, I was looking at it, Eluscoen. Now, they are a Martinist order of the Rosicrucians, and they operate throughout Scandinavia and in several other countries, including Portugal, I think. Now, let's just go into what they're saying about themselves. They were based on this character. The whole philosophy of it is based on Martinez Depasquale. Now, it says here on their website, the school of Martinez Depasquale is placed wholly outside the narrow limits and sordid motives of ceremonial magic. Yet, they actually endorse theurgical magic, which is ceremonial magic. Now, that statement is their public statement from Ellis Cohen, their website, the Martinists, and the Order of the Rose Cross. And at the end of the day, or without beating about the bush, they talk in great detail about how to summon demons, and Satan in particular, in order to bind them so that they're under control. Now, this is a completely warped ideology for this very reason, because this is exactly what the black magician does. So in other words, they're trying to use these demonic entities for power, because if you don't want to interact with these entities and have nothing to do with them, you should never mention their names. And that's really important, because in magic it's all about names of power. And this is where we get into the Kabbalah and all of this ancient mystery school stuff, which is basically dressed up as though it's knowledge, when in fact a lot of it is black magic, which is all about power and control over another entity, human being, or even object. Now, so we talked about this. This is exactly what the black magician does through ritual, hocus pocus and ceremony, using props, skulls, incense and invocations, which is exactly what this organisation are based on. They're actually based on that. Now, Martinism is a common name, it says on their website, it's a common name given to a secret mystic theosophy concerning the origin and destiny of man. So they want to define what is the destiny of man. The source of the teachings is shrouded in the antiquities of history. Oh, there's the allegorical, mystical bit, but was conceived and shaped into a coherent philosophy and spiritual school by three distinct individuals, giving rise to the name Martinism. Martinez Depasquale and his two students and friends, Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin and Jean-Baptiste Villemos. Now, this is getting interesting, because we go into this chap, Martinez Depasquale. He was born in 1720 something, they say around 1727 ? Died in 1774. He was a theurgist, which is basically a magician who's into ritual, and a theosopher, and he was the founder of this organisation, the Ellis Cohens, sometimes spelt Cohen as in Cohens. However, on their website they state this is an incorrect spelling, but they actually use it on their own website. So that's a bit of a slip, or maybe it means something else. So, okay. The work of the Martinist. Always remember that man is the masterpiece of creation. Now, this is interesting because they're saying that man is the masterpiece. In other words, man is the product of an immense amount of work, and he is a perfected creature. Now, this is completely opposite to any form of initiation into knowledge, in the respect that if you're saying you're perfect to start with, how then can you ever reach perfection when you're stating that you are perfected? So this is a bit of a warning sign to me when people start saying this sort of thing, because it goes straight into Luciferianism. Now, so let's carry on. Always remember that man is the masterpiece of creation, which the Eternal emanated in his image and likeness. Let this penetrate your soul's undying nature and separate gently your celestial and imperishable core from all foreign alloys that have formed within you. So this is basically saying that you have to become your own alchemist, that the alchemy and the light that they're talking about is Luciferian light, which is already within you. All you have to do is reignite this fire. That's really what they're saying. So in other words, this doesn't seem to me to be about a quest for knowledge or self-improvement. This is all about power. So this is the cult of me, the great I am, which we've been talking about. We've been talking about that over the last few weeks, and what Manly P. Hall was warning about, really. And it gives rise to hunger for power and control over inner illumination, which is the cover masquerading as Gnosticism. Now, this is really interesting stuff. So basically, they want to conjure up demons. And they say this as part of a ritual. Now, I'm not going to say the demons' names, because I do believe that these things do have a certain amount of power. And I've had enough gremlins tonight without attracting any more into the room, okay? So he said, this is one of their rituals. He says, all of you formidable beings, beings of iniquity, confusion and abomination, hearken and tremble at my voice and commandment. All of you great and powerful demons of the four universal regions, all you demonical legions, subtle spirits of confusion, horror and persecution, hear my voice and tremble when it sounds among you, and during your cursed operations I command you by the one who has pronounced eternal death on all of you. Okay, so there then follows an address to each of the four main demons already mentioned, beginning with their main demonic entity. And they carry on with basically, on you, Satan, I impose excommunication. I tie and restrict you to your formidable region in the name of the Most High God, the Eternal Avenger and Rewarder. Now, this is very interesting because this is what the demonology of King Solomon was all about. King Solomon bound 72 demons, which he used. So in other words, he was into demonology. And he bound these demons basically to work for him as slaves. So this is just black magic. That's all it is. Then they carry on with this ritual, and it states, then came an invocation of the good spirits. Well, wait a minute, why would you summon up the bad spirits and bind them to your will before you summon the good spirits? Why not have nothing to do with the bad spirits and just deal with the good ones? Or your view of the good ones, which their view of the good ones is probably not mine. All this was carried out within a tracing similar to the one used for the ceremony already described, they say. So basically what they do then is they bind the good spirits in the same way as they bind the bad spirits, by completely overpowering them. So this is starting to sound a little bit like insanity and megalomania to me. Now, none of these rituals was done primarily for the purpose of calling up particular spirits. Well, that's totally contradictory, because they've just done it Now, the main aim, it says here, was of a higher order, namely communication with what Pasquale called the active and intelligent cause. Now, wait a minute, if you're going to the root of everything, which is a unified field, why don't you go straight to the unified field? What on earth are you doing messing around with these entities, which at best are kind of dispossessed and at worst actually destructive and hateful creatures? Why would you be doing this? What's the point of it? It's a bit contradictory, isn't it? So they don't do black magic, but they do summon demons. Yeah, that's interesting. Now, people may be wondering where all this is going, but the point about it is that when we look at what's being promoted, it starts to fit in very well with it all. And looking at the United Nations, what is their agenda? What is it? So, in other words, they've got these invocations to entities which they define as evil, and then they do the same with the evil ones as they do with the good ones. And it's basically ceremonial magic. Now, a big part of the story here is the rebuilding of Solomon's temple. But we have to remember that Solomon, or the story which states he existed, also told us he controlled 72 demons by binding them under his control through Kabbalah. Now, if we look at Kabbalah, that actually ties in and was tied in with the 22 paths of the tarot. I was looking at the Theosophical Society of the United States, and we have, for instance, the tarot cards being aligned with the paths on the tree of life of the Kabbalah. Now, the Kabbalah has two sides. The Kabbalah is also the control of the 72 demons of King Solomon. It's basically teaching people how to control demons. So we know that the Rosicrucians, or this reformed Rosicrucians, are Kabbalists, and that's quite important. Now, if we look at the paths, for instance, we have Kether, which is the head, and Bina, or the magician. You've got, loads of them. I won't bother reading those out because you can look at those yourself. It's going to be a bit boring to read a list of those out. But the 78 cards are of two basically different kinds. This is the tarot. The major arcana, meaning secret, esoteric or hidden, of which there are 22 cards, and the minor arcana, of which there are 56. Now, the major cards are the ones that matter. The minor cards are all sort of routes that people take within life, etc. Well, we don't need to go into tarot. The thing is that the actual origins of the tarot are not that well known, but the tarot eventually became associated with the Kabbalah, and this is from the Theosophical Society. Yeah? And in particular, the Kabbalistic tree of life. There is the predictable controversy about when and how these two giants of metaphysical thought came together, with theories ranging from biblical times to the 19th century. However, it is clear that by the 19th century, the two modalities were used in concert to the great enhancement of the tarot cards. Now, in 1856, Alphonse Louis Constant, also known as Eliphas Levi, published the first book to associate the 22 cards of the major arcana with the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and the 4 suits of the minor arcana with the tetragrammaton, which is the 4-letter name of God, which is in Hebrew YVYH, Ive. Now, in 1889, Gerald Oncourse, a student of Levi known as Pappus, published the Tarot of the Bohemians, which asserts that the tarot was generated by the tetragrammaton and is to be understood in terms of it. So what we've got is this 18th century occultist stuff which goes into black magic, which has had a huge impact on this later Rosicrucian Brotherhood. That's what it appears to be. So the control of demons and the Kabbalistic tree of life mixed in with the tarot interlink this hocus pocus magic, which is passed onto the uninitiated or New Age narcissists, who are the lower orders or servants of the hierophants or the elite who are controlling them. Now, that might have sounded a bit confusing, but what I'm saying here is that a lower magic has been passed to these initiates who aren't really initiates, who will never be allowed anywhere near these orders, but are doing the lower demonic work of them through the New Age. Now, this started to me to make absolute sense when I really started looking into these texts. It all jumped out at me, but that's possibly because I've been looking into it for about 25 years, on and off, and so none of this was alien to me. But if it is alien to you, it will sound a bit strange. But basically what we've got is a necromancy cult, which is really at the back of this, a necromancy cult which uses black magic to disempower certain people while keeping the power within their own order. And the disempowered people are agents of chaos. Often they're agents of chaos who are put out there to actually cause as much confusion as possible, which is, of course, Satanism. That's what Satan does. So I've seen examples of this, and the reason that I can take to this so easily is because of the examples that I've seen, because I've seen this kind of thing happening around me, and I see it happening to other people. In other words, I see them getting attacked by what is basically black magic, and that comes into the reality of people's lives through being targeted. It's not just stuff that happens in the ether as magic. It is actually brought about by using these narcissists and these idiots. And it could be a local council, it could be traffic wardens. They're all working for it. I'm trying to give it a simplistic analogy here, right? Because I don't want to get too esoteric. And you might say, well, you have been for the past half an hour. Well, that is true. But this seems to be working quite well. The head of this, which imposes the global power through its agency of change and philanthropy, is, of course, the UN. And they do this very, very powerfully through the New Age, which came out of things like the Theosophical Society, the Theosophists, which just talked about. Now, this is where it ties in as well with the ancient Church of Rome, the Vatican. Now, let's see these parallels, because obviously the Catholic Church used a lot of paganism, and that was the way that they recruited their converts. So if we look at the worship of objects and the worship of bones, manuscripts and relics, which is absolute in the Roman Church, they absolutely worship bones. They worship basically objects, and they imbibe these objects with power. They actually believe that these objects have supernatural power. And what they're doing in a lot of respects is a necromancy cult. Now, I had a friend in Australia who was doing a lot of research into this stuff, who's now kind of gone into the background. And he gave me a lot of information in this. And that information was also backed up by Bishop Richard Williamson, who's basically been excommunicated from the Catholic Church, although not officially. There's no actual official excommunication. But if you look on our YouTube channel, we've got some videos there with Bishop Richard Williamson and the New World Order. I did two very interesting interviews with him. Now, I don't agree with everything Bishop Williamson says, but I do have respect for him in that he is on the right side, because he is against this satanic New World Order. That's what he's against. He's totally against that. Now, whether you believe everything that he believes, and I don't, but I agree on many points, and I've got great respect for him. I went down to meet him, did an interview with him. He's a very respectful person, and also he was absolutely open to what I said, all about the UN, all about Agenda 21. He was fascinated with all that, and he was very thoughtful about it, and he took it in, which I was very impressed with, and I was very impressed with his character and his strength of belief, which is slightly different than mine, but he has faith in something which he believes, which is the opposite, in my view, of what these people have. They're destroying any faith. They want absolute control, but they don't want to put any work in. They want actually to use subterfuge and subversion to get what they want. Now, this is an interesting, and it ties in with our interviews with Bishop Williamson. Now, the change in the priest in the Catholic Church, addressing God and facing east with his back to the congregation, and the new order of Vatican II, which came in the early 60s, where he addresses the congregation as an agent of God, is synonymous with the rise of Luciferianism and the New World Order. An unstructured but omnipresent force in every country and indeed every local authority. Now, I am getting esoteric this week, but I think this is actually warranted because we've covered everything at the front end of this, and I'm trying to get through to what's really behind it. As I say, we've covered the New Age, but we're going a lot further here. Now, this can actually be tied into our shows. So look at the global local agenda. Look at our talks, the bigger picture. Book our talks on this, because what we're doing in those talks is giving people practical ideas of how to regain your own power, in the respect that you can stop this black magic cult actually taking over your life. And whether that means standing up for natural law, whether that means winning court cases against your local council, whether it means removing clamps from your vehicle, well, they're all part of the same thing, really. That's what I'm saying here, I think. Just, I'm trying to give it a bigger perspective. Now, this was a woman who, I'm going to get on to, who made a speech at the Davos World Economic Forum. Now, this was annual meeting of the Global Future Councils, and I just need to look at... Yes, I've got it now. It was Ida Auken, Ida Auken, Auken, who's a member of Parliament in Denmark, but she was former Minister for the Environment in Denmark. And this is a person I'm calling out as a useful idiot, and we have useful idiots on every week. But I want to try and put this whole thing into context. So I'm going to read out something that she said, and it was published in 2018. And the article is part of the annual meeting of the Global Future Councils. And she's written an essay which absolutely sums up what is at the front and at the back of this New World Order. In other words, you've got a hierarchy that controls everything in a police state, but they're doing it under the guise of benevolence and social equity, which of course means nothing for us and everything for them. That's what social equity means. It means we get nothing. We have no rights. It's like social justice. That means we have no rights. That's what these things actually mean, because when we take them apart and look into these terms and how they're used, this is exactly how they are being used and enforced. So the article is called "What If Privacy Becomes a Luxury Good or Goods?" And it's a session from the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in 2017. So this woman, Ida Auken, she starts by saying, "Welcome to the year 2030. So this is the Agenda 2030, yeah? So she's doing it as though Agenda 2030 is already here. So we're in 2030 now and the agenda's complete. So she's doing it as a projection into the future. And she starts by going, "Welcome to my city," or should I say, our city. I don't own anything. I don't own a car. I don't own a house. I don't own any appliances or any clothes. This may seem odd to you, but it makes perfect sense for us in this city. Everything you considered a product has now become a service. We have access to transportation, accommodation, food, and all the things we need in our daily lives. One by one, all of these things became free. So it ended up not making sense for us to own much. First, communication became digitalized and free to everyone. Then, when clean energy became free, things started to move quickly. Transportation dropped dramatically in price. It made no sense for us to own cars anymore because we could call a driverless vehicle or a flying car for longer journeys within minutes. We started transporting ourselves in a much more organised and coordinated way when public transport became easier, quicker and more convenient than the car. Now I can hardly believe that we accepted congestion and traffic jams, not to mention the air pollution from combustion engines. What were we thinking, she says. Now, it carries on, but I think you can already see what's wrong with this kind of philosophy. Because what she's saying here is that you don't have anything and you can't have ownership of everything. But basically, who owns everything? Well, the state owns everything. Of course the state owns everything. But what happens when the state takes away what you are having on loan from the state? This is the totally flawed thinking. What she's saying is that you don't need anything because you're never going to own anything. And in a way, this goes back to claims that the Catholic Church have made, unum sanctum, they own everything under God, etc. And of course, in the present system, we don't actually own anything. We have the title for it. We have the title deeds to the property. We never own the property. Property can't be owned. Nothing can actually be owned. We have usufruct, which means we have a use of it. But we have that under certain terms and conditions. What she's saying is there are no terms and conditions anymore. And this is exactly what the Luciferians are trying to impose on us. So, let's carry on with this. Sometimes I use my bike when I go to see my new friends. I enjoy the exercise and the ride. It kind of gets the soul to come along the journey. It's nonsense. Funny how some things never seem to lose their excitement. Walking, biking, cooking, drawing and growing plants. It makes perfect sense and reminds us of how our culture emerged out of a close relationship with nature. Now this is actually totally reversal of what's actually going on under Agenda 21. And she does actually get to that in the end. Now, let's just get back to this. Yes. What will we eat in 2030? This also made the breakthrough of the circular economy easier. When products are turned into services, no one has an interest in things with a short lifespan. Well, this is actually going on now because if you look at products, they get routinely thrown into the street even when they're working. So nobody wants anything anymore. They all want everything new. But it says everything is designed for durability, repairability and recyclability. Well, it's not anymore, actually. Environmental problems seem far away since we only use clean energy and clean production methods. The air is clean, the water is clean, and nobody would dare to touch the protected areas of nature because they constitute such value to our well-being. Now, Let's read that bit again. The air is clean, the water is clean, and nobody would dare to touch the protected areas of nature because they constitute such value to our well-being. In the cities we have plenty of green space and plants and trees all over. I still do not understand why in the past we filled all free spots in the city with concrete. Now, this is, for anybody who's actually undergoing the regeneration plans, this will actually be laughable to them, the naivety of this statement. But what she's basically said there is, the Wildlands project, which is cutting off the countryside and has not been allowed in it, is a really good idea. And this is the sort of philosophy that's been drummed into these people. So she carries on with the death of shopping. Shopping. I can really remember what that was. I can't really remember what that was, actually. She says, for most of us, it has been turned into choosing things to use. Sometimes I find this fun, and sometimes I just want the algorithm to do it for me. It knows my taste better than I do by now. Well, this is incredible, isn't it? So basically, she wants to get rid of all her own choice and have choice imposed on her. And of course, that's algorithms. That's your computer telling you what you want because of your searches, all the rest of it. But this is just completely flawed thinking. When AI and robots took over so much of our work, we suddenly had time to eat well, sleep well, and spend time with other people. The concept of rush hour makes no sense anymore, since the work that we can do can be done at any time. I don't really know if I would call it work anymore. It is more like thinking time, creation time, and development time. Well, that's a very, very naive view of what's coming, because it's absolutely a poverty economy. The whole idea of this is to drive you into grinding poverty. You can't own anything, you'll never own anything, and the state owns you. That's what it's about. She carries on, for a while everything was turned into entertainment and people did not want to bother themselves with difficult issues. It was only at the last minute that we found out how to use all these new technologies for better purposes than just killing time. So in other words, she's talking about a future where people don't do anything. They don't want to learn anything, and they just spend time in idle conversation or mindless entertainment. They live different kinds of lives outside of the city, she carries on. My biggest concern is all the people who do not live in our city, those we lost on the way, those who decided that it became too much, all this technology, those who felt obsolete and useless when robots and AI took over big parts of our jobs, those who got upset with the political system and turned against it. They live different kind of lives outside of the city. Some have formed little self-supplying communities. Others just stayed in the empty and abandoned houses in small 19th century villages. Well, that would be great, wouldn't it, if we were allowed to do that? Wouldn't that be brilliant? If we're actually allowed to go and live where we want. I don't think she's actually taken into consideration what's really coming here, has she? Once in a while, she carries on, I get annoyed about the fact that I have no real privacy. Nowhere I can go and not be registered. I know that somewhere everything I do, think and dream of is recorded. I just hope that nobody will use it against me. Well, you're a useful idiot, so they're not going to use it against you until they have to. All in all, she carries on, it is a good life, much better than the path we were on, where it became so clear that we could not continue with the same model of growth. We had all these terrible things happening, lifestyle diseases, climate change, the refugee crisis, environmental degradation, completely congested cities, water pollution, air pollution, social unrest and unemployment. Now, she doesn't actually get to the root of what these things are, the root of where this comes from, all the things she's talking about. The idea of climate change, the refugee crisis, disease, congested cities, water pollution, air pollution, all comes from the same people who are going to enforce the new agenda. So it's the old problem, reaction, solution chestnut, you know. And she's saying that, no, these things were real. So it's got an author's note at the bottom, right? She carries on. Some people have read this blog as my utopia or a dream for the future. It is not. It is a scenario showing where we could be heading. Well, she should know because she's part of the World Economic Forum, for better and for worse. I wrote this piece to start a discussion about some of the pros and cons of the current technological development. When are we dealing with the future? It is not enough to work with reports. When we are dealing with the future, it is not enough to work with reports. We shall start discussions in many new ways. This is the intention, she goes on, with all that has been publicised and used by the Brotherhood to promote the sort of useful idiot who wrote this piece. That's my addition to it. Now, that really, it didn't shock me, but this is the mentality of these people. They're thinking what's coming is really good. However, I don't think that they're going to allow people to live outside it. I was looking yesterday at what's going on in California, and they've built a block that looks like a prison, which is 1/4 mile long at least. It's absolutely incredible. This is a hothouse that's going to hive thousands of people, basically radiating them with 5G and all the rest of it. And what's happening in California? The wildfires. Now, these fires are definitely not natural, and we've been reporting on this from last year. But if you look at even the news footage that's coming in, you can see that those houses are totally razed to the ground, absolutely nothing left, and there's trees around them that are fine. So how can this be happening? So what we are seeing is a culling of houses, and they are getting people off the land. And so the actual use of these people as useful idiots, like this woman, this Ada Orkin, who wrote that piece, they are basically just these useful idiots of these Luciferians. Well, let's get back now to the Sons of Cain, because that's what we started talking about. We talked about the Sons of Cain and the Sons of Abel and the Sons of Seth, who joined or allegedly joined forces with the Sons of Cain. So let's get back to some research on this, and I'm going to read this from The Curse of Canaan by Eustace Mullins in a minute, okay? But the Sons of Cain, or as they like to call themselves, the Illumined Brotherhood, are using the worker drones in public office to enforce their Luciferian power and absolute slave system control of the Sons of Abel, whom they believe through their manifesto are compliant and follow their rulers, and are synonymous with water, whilst they are synonymous with fire and the light of their god Lucifer. Now, that's something I wrote basically as a preface to this second part of the show. So the Sons of Cain, or as they like to call themselves, the Illumined Brotherhood. So bearing that in mind, let's just read this out from The Curse of Canaan by Eustace Mullins, which is also called A Demonology of History, and it was written in 1987. The popular and apparently sensible appeal of humanism is that humanity should always place human interests first. The problem is that this very humanism can be traced in an unbroken line all the way back to the biblical curse of Canaan. Humanism is the logical result of the demonology of history. This is Eustace Mullins. Modern day events can be understood only if we can trace their implications in a direct line from the earliest records of antiquity. These records concern pre-Adamic man, a hybrid creature whose origins are described in ancient books. The Book of Enoch, which itself is part of an earlier Book of Noah, written about 161 BC, says the Samjaza, or Satan, the leader of a band of 200 angels, descended on Mount Carmel. They had lusted after the daughters of men from afar, and now they took them for wives. These fallen angels, known as the Order of the Watchers, taught their wives magic. The issue of these unions was a race of giants known as the Nephilim. Now, we've covered this quite a lot, and I've got some great quotes on that in previous shows. The Bible does not mention the Nephilim specifically by name, and Strong's Concordance does not list them. However, Nelson's Concordance has several listings under Nephilim. Right, that's a side note. But let's go now to Genesis 6:4, which there were giants in the earth in those days. The Revised Standard Version does give the name of the Nephilim in the same verse reading. So in the New Bible, we do get the Nephilim, and he's saying that the original Bible does not list them. Okay, now, so I suppose this is from the St. James. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. These giants later became known as the Sons of Anak in Numbers 1333. In Numbers, it says, "There we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants. These giants constituted a powerful menace to other peoples." Now, in Deuteronomy 9:2 is the complaint. "Who can stand before the children of Anak? Nevertheless, they were finally killed or driven out. There were none of the Anakims left in the land of the children of Israel." That's from Joshua 11:22. "These early giants would be considered as mutations by modern scientists," says Mullins. "Because of their peculiar parentage, they had habits and lusts which horrified their neighbours. Their leader, Satan, the adversary of God, also known as Satana, was the serpent who entered into and seduced Eve, producing the first murderer, Cain. Not only were the Nephilim a menace to others, their uncontrollable hatred and violence sometimes led them to attack and kill each other. They then ate their victims, introducing cannibalism to the world. Now, there are references to cannibalism and the Nephilim. He's right there. According to some accounts, God slaughtered them while the Archangel Michael imprisoned the fallen angels, the Order of the Watchers, in deep chasms in the earth. Right, now this is going to be interesting later on, inside the earth. Unfortunately for humanity, this was not the end of the matter. Satan, through his children, the Nephilim, and also through Cain, had now established a demonic presence on earth. This is the story of the Watchers and the Nephilim, in that when they were wiped out, they left evil spirits on the earth, and those evil spirits were very powerful. Now, what it seems to suggest is that these secret societies are summoning up these evil spirits that were left behind. Well, if they're Satanists, that's exactly what they're doing. So this is a very important myth to these people. Very interesting. Let's see what's happening in chat. It's still free choice if I choose to buy something that has been selected for me to buy. That's right. That's the whole thing. In fact, there was somebody talking about that with David Icke. David Icke was on with Eamon Holmes. It's on YouTube. It's actually quite a good interview, but there's a girl there, and she says, but I like having everything chosen for me. And he goes, so you like being monitored and arrhythmically kind of basically being driven into slavery. And later on she goes, oh, I'm a bit of a rebel too. You know, I mean, you can't make it up the way people are now. They just don't have the capacity to think about anything. But let's get back to this. So, yes. So they ate their victims, introducing cannibalism to the world. According to some accounts, God slaughtered them, while the Archangel Michael imprisoned the fallen angels, the Order of the Watchers, in deep chasms in the earth. I've repeated that because it's quite important. Unfortunately, this was not the end of the matter. Satan, through his children, the Nephilim, and also through Cain, had now established a demonic presence on the earth. This is where this belief system comes in. His rebellion against God would result in continuous suffering and travail on earth for centuries to come. The history of mankind since his rebellion is the history of the struggle between the people of God and the cult of Satan. With this understanding, it is now possible to trace the historical events which reveal the actual archives of the two adversaries. So, the Curse of Canaan. The Curse of Canaan was extended to the land which was named after him, the land of Canaan. The Canaanites themselves, the people of this land, became the greatest curse upon humanity, and so they remain today. Not only did they originate the practices of demon worship, occult rites, child sacrifice and cannibalism, but as they went abroad, they brought these obscene practices into every land which they entered. Not only did they bring their demonic cult to Egypt, but known by their later name, the Phoenicians, as they were called after 1200 BC, they became the demonizers of civilization through successive epochs, being known in medieval history as the Venetians, who destroyed the great Byzantine Christian civilization, and later as the black nobility, which infiltrated the nations of Europe and gradually assumed power through trickery, revolution, and financial legerdemain. Now, this is very interesting because the Byzantine civilization is extremely fascinating and extremely advanced. Now, the reputation of Canaan is to be found in many ancient records, although its foul history has been carefully expunged from even more of the historic archives and libraries. In 1225 BC, the pharaoh Meneptah, who because of his victories in the Canaanite region was known as Binder of Giza, set up a stele to commemorate his successes. Among the inscriptions placed thereupon was this: plundered is the Canaan with every evil, all lands are united and pacified. This inscription did not mean that Meneptah had used every evil to plunder the Canaan. It meant that he had his sojourn there encountered every evil practice by this notorious tribe. Ham had 4 sons: Cush, who founded the land of Ethiopia; Mizraim, who founded Egypt; Put, who founded Libya; and Canaan, who founded the land of the Canaanites, the area now in contention as the state of Israel. So let's get on now to this updated version of the Rosicrucians. But before that, we're going to have a little bit of a break, because this is quite heavy going stuff. And in part 2, everything we've been talking about in part 1 here will start to become a bit clearer if it's not clear already. So we're going to have a bit of IJ Chris and Where You're Gonna Hide.
Well, I don't know this. Where you gonna big up father, big up minor. Respect to you promotion, you know. I will say, holiday, stay so.
No place to run, no place to hide.
When one want to say, I four them kill a St. Thomas one day and that wrong. Last year I know.
Same situation. New crime strategies every day.
Put on the gun, man, put on the gun.
Yet still so much are dying. Yeah. Children can't come out to play.
Four them kill a St. Thomas the other day.
'Cause in the streets gunshots so spray. Yeah. You can't be too blind to see that it's a fulfillment of prophecy.
I know that.
Better get down on your knees
And the only thing can save us right now. Jah.
and leave all things to the Almighty. Yes, no man knows his destiny,
So you want to take a next man life?
but all these things will have to be
Judgment fear.
Who have eyes, let them see. Who have ears, let them hear. That they be warned. Wars and rumors of wars. Earthquake, lightning, and thunder. More settlers than buyers. There will be war. Wars and rumors of wars. Earthquake, lightning, and thunder. Brimstone and fire. Autumn, there will be war. Wars and rumors of war. Nation fighting against nations. Mothers against sons. Oh, there will be war. Wars and rumors of wars. Yeah. More blood spilling. More blood spilling in the streets. Mothers mourning. Mourning for their disease.
No flood full of
Oh,
red sea.
dog them down. Oh, yeah. Where you gonna run? Where you gonna hide?
No, look, look, look.
Where you gonna run? Oh, yeah. Just wait until tomorrow.
Watch a man.
Oh, yeah. For your dirty deeds, you'll have to pay. Your judgment day, draw it near.
You hear that?
For your dirty deeds, you'll have to pay. Wars and rumors of war. Earthquake, lightning, and thunder. More settlers than buyers.
Better know.
There will be war. Wars and rumors of wars. Earthquake, lightning, and thunder. Brimstone and fire. Hotter, there will be war.
Judgment from
Wars
Babylon.
and rumors of war.
Lost.
Nation fighting against nations. Mothers against sons. Boy, babes are being
I'm not
babes.
afraid of God.
Babes are being babes. Babes are being babes. Babes are being
Afraid of God.
Welcome back to Windows on the World. That was Where You're Gonna Hide by IJ Chris, who's one of our listeners and contributors. So thanks, Chris. That's great. Really good track, that, actually. I'm going to dig out a few more of yours because you very kindly let us use them on the show. So we're going to get back to this now and onto this character called Max Heindel, who lived from 1865 to 1919. Now, here is the story of him and the Rosy Cross under the instruction of the elder brother. Now, the elder brother is somebody who's never seen in the background, and basically we're never going to know who it is. So this was the great idea about this Rosicrucian mystery, is that we'll never know actually who people are, and anyone could actually say that they were Rosicrucian and you wouldn't know whether they were or whether they weren't. So the whole way it was presented was of a secret society that wanted to interact and wanted illumined people, and what it turned into was basically, yes, an Illuminati cult by the look of it. I'm not sure that was exactly what they had in mind to start with, even though looking at some of the early documents seem to be running along, well, they're starting to run along similar lines as the ones proposed by Max Heindel. So let's have a look at this character. Under instruction of the elder brother, the highly evolved entity that visited Heindel, this elder brother, eventually identified himself as the elder brother of the Rosicrucian Order, an order in the inner worlds, formed in the year 1313 and having no direct connection to physical organisations which call themselves by this name. So they love allegory. They just love it, don't they? So in other words, it's actually nothing to do with any known physical organisation. So everything we know about it, we don't know about it, basically. As he afterwards mentions, the elder brother gave him information which was concise and logical and beyond anything he was capable of writing. Another allegorical kind of mumbo-jumbo, really. But later he found out that during a previous visit of the elder brother, he was put to a test to determine his worthiness to be messenger of the Western wisdom teachings. He recounts that only then he was given instructions how to teach or reach the etheric temple of the Rose Cross near the German Bohemian border, and how at this temple he was in direct communication with and under the personal instruction of the elder brothers of the Rose Cross. Now this is typical Rosicrucian stuff. It's all allegory, it's all secrets, and they never tell you really anything. The Rosicrucian Order is described as being composed of 12 elder brothers gathered around a 13th, who is the invisible head. These great adepts, belonging to human evolution, but having already advanced far beyond the cycle of rebirth, are reported as being among those exalted beings who guide mankind's evolution. In other words, self-appointed priest class. Okay. Furthermore, some help with that. I think I'll leave that bit out actually, because we don't think we need that. But let's go back up to Max Heindel. Yeah, I have a bit of a problem with this sometimes. It starts jumping about. Yeah. So let's get on to this character Max Heindel now. In his work on the Rosicrucian Order, Heindel states, in the book of Genesis, after Cain kills Abel, God curses Cain to a life of toil and wandering. But when Cain laments that his own life is in danger, God promises to protect him. This is what we started off the show with. The Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who came upon him would kill him. Genesis 4:15. The re-establishment of the Rosicrucian Manifesto, Order of the Rose Cross, by a man who changed his name to Max Heindel in 1865 to 1919, was when he lived. So he changed his name to Max Heindel. He was of a well-connected family, an inheritor of Freemasonic knowledge. His father was a high-ranking Freemason. He had some interesting insights, though, into the present order of the world, which is a bit of an understatement. So the allegorical battle between the Sons of Cain, who co-opted the Sons of Seth to work a Luciferian ideology which revolves around egotism and self-righteous power to the detriment of those under their assumed authority, namely the Sons of Abel, is central to the manifesto as laid out by Heindel. That's very, very important. This allegorical battle between the Sons of Cain, who co-opted the Sons of Seth through marriage and corruption to work a Luciferian ideology revolving around egotism and self-righteous power. That's really what this is about, a complete assumption. The sons of Cain and Seth combined forces to build the mythical Solomon's Temple, right? This is part of this new Rosicrucian manifesto, which actually echoes a lot of what is in the original Rosicrucian documents, which is the Forma Fraternitatis and the Confessio. The sons of Cain were thrown out in favour of the sons of Seth in the building of Solomon's Temple, okay? So the sons of Cain were not favoured by God. They were thrown out. This is the allegorical story. It's not what I believe, it's what they believe, or what they say they believe. So Hiram Abiff, who was the architect, who was appointed by the king of Tyre, was enraged. He was the guy who was meant to be the architect and builder of Solomon's Temple. He was enraged that he was not solely responsible for the building of the temple. Now, this goes right into this Luciferian belief. In other words, if it's not all about me, I'm not interested. On the instruction of Tubal Cain, Hiram jumped into the molten sea and passed through 9 layers of earth. Having received the baptism of fire, he would be anointed with water and spirit, and every son of the widow would come to him, and he would build a new city and temple. And of course, every Freemason refers to themselves as the son of the widow. That's why they throw their arms up in court and say, who will help the widow's son? Which is a pretty blatant thing to do, really, and a pretty desperate thing to do. But there's a sign for it where they put both arms up. And that's meant to be a signal to the judge to help them. So basically, Hiram Abiff was a bit miffed about all this. And what we have to look at is this Order of the Rose Cross and what they believe. So Hiram Abiff is basically reborn as Lazarus, son of the widow in Nain. And remember that Jesus also, he was the son of the Tecton, which is an architect, and descended to the centre of the earth at the age of 33. This is their belief system. This is what they believe. And Lazarus raises from the dead with a symbol of the rose and blends both water and fire. Now, this is where it gets important. If you wondered where it was all going. So, in other words, the sons of Cain and Abel are brought together by this magical alchemy, which is basically the blending of water and fire, by the symbol of the rose, which they think is the rose cross. So, in the order of the RC, there are to them certain sacred numbers, right? 1, 5, and 7 are very important. The 1 would be the me, the whole. There are 7 schools of the lesser mysteries and 5 schools of the greater mysteries. And the 12 brothers of the RC possess material bodies. 7 go out into the world and 5 never leave the temple. They are assisted in their work by the unlimited number of lay brothers and sisters. In other words, useful idiots. These are people of the Western world who can leave their bodies consciously. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because in all of these ancient so-called mystery schools, what the whole thing is about is preparing yourself for death and afterlife and being able to leave the body at will. So in other words, when you leave the body, you know you've left the body. You're not going to be a ghost. You're not going to be stuck down into lower dimensions. You're not going to be trapped by these lower demonic entities. You're going to be free to fly around the world as a disembodied entity, or part of the brotherhood. This is what they believe. So in other words, this idea of immortality is absolutely paramount to them. But that's interesting, because what they seem to be into is a Luciferian doctrine, which is about just having power on the earth while you're on earth. So I think there's a bit of a contradiction going on here, because they're saying they want the people of the Western world, who are their lay brothers and sisters, can leave their bodies consciously. So that takes us in to the beliefs also of the Knights Templars, which is quite interesting, and their hexagonal towers. And these hexagonal towers and the octagonal towers. Now, these are sacred geometry, and the hexagon and octagon are used. The hexagram, of course, is on the north pole of Saturn. It has a hexagonal kind of weather system. If you have a look at the top of Saturn, it's totally and utterly bizarre. Not that you can do, but you can take a look at some basically photographs of the North Pole of Saturn, and we did a whole show called The Cult of Saturn, and Saturnalia and the worship of Saturn is extremely important to these people. Saturn appears to have gone further out of the solar system, out towards the edge, and it's alleged to have been a lot closer thousands of years ago. Now, we don't know that, we've got no proof of that, but if you look at Saturn Death Cult by Troy McLaughlin, have a look at that. And also, we did a show called The Cult of Saturn, which has now been taken down by the People's Voice. It was on their channel. I might upload it again. And I went into this in great detail. This Saturnian cult is extremely important. It's a cult of sacrifice. And it's a cult of law and order and enforcement, basically enforcement by a third party. Now, let's get back to the Forma Fraternitatis, this first Rosicrucian document released by Tobias Hess, who lived 1568 to 1614. He appealed to leaders, classes and scholars to come together to form the religion, politics and science of the future, the Brotherhood of the Rose Cross. The ancient world revered religion and philosophy, the Middle Ages revered science and religion, and the New Age reveres science and politics. So that's why we've got this kind of new order, which is really all about materialism. And the Brotherhood of the Rose Cross want to get rid of materialism, but what they want to do is get rid of anything material that we use, and they want ownership of everything, if this is their belief, which it appears to be. Now, there was the fellow who actually wrote a response, first of all, to the Forma Fraternitatis in 1612, was called Adam Hasselmeyer, and he thought that what he said was going to be really popular, and it wasn't, of course, because he had a go at the present order of the Catholic Church and the Jesuits in particular. And the Archduke Maximilian of Tyrol arrested and sentenced him to 4.5 years on the galleys as a slave. When he came out, he was still working towards the fulfillment of this new order, this new manifesto, which basically made him a victim. Now, Francis Bacon was influenced by the RC in his New Atlantis manifesto. So Bacon's often quoted as being in many places, and it appears that he was. Now, let's have a look at this belief system. Like all other mystery orders, the Order of the Rose Cross is formed on cosmic lines, as one needs 12 balls of equal size to cover and hide a 13th from view, and 12 signs of the zodiac envelop our solar system, and 12 half-tones of the musical scale comprise the octave. The Rosicrucian Order is also composed of 12 brothers, and a 13th who is head of the order and is hidden from the outside world by the 12. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that very, very interesting? Even the pupils of the school, the lay brothers and lay sisters, never see him. But at nightly services in the temple, all feel his presence when he enters, and that is the signal for the ceremony to begin. So this is a supernatural cult. And these people want their useful idiots to destroy the idea of the paranormal and bring it into a materialistic worldview of humanism, and basically that we are a blight on the earth, etc., as in Agenda 21. But they want to keep this for themselves. So in other words, they believe firmly and strongly in the supernatural, but they want to destroy it in the eyes of the public. So, who is this 13th man who's hidden by the 12? The 13th man is the benevolent dictator of the Rosicrucian Order. So, let's go back into the Rosicrucian Fellowship in America, which was brought into being by Max Heindel an elder brother of the Order of the Rose Cross, instructed him. Now, this is very interesting when we get into what they actually believe. And it's not what I believe, it's what they believe. So, an elder brother of the Order of the Rose Cross instructed Heindel for the purpose of disseminating the teachings which had previously been revealed only privately or in symbolic language. Before discussing this further, it is necessary to know of the origins and goal of the Rosicrucian Order. Now let's get into this document, because this is absolutely fascinating. And people are going to say, well, how did they know that? Well, maybe they didn't. I don't think it really matters. But it says the origin of the order lies in the distant past at the beginning of the Earth period. But its primeval origin began in the 3 periods before that. At the beginning of our evolution, during the Saturn period, heat was the only heat was the only element manifest and mankind, which was in a mineral state of consciousness, and it formed a unity. Later, in the Sun period, the root of a new element, air, evolved and coalesced with the fire element from the Saturn period. Fire burst into flames, and the dark world became a blazing ball of luminous fire mist. Mankind had a plant-like consciousness, but was yet one family. Now, I suppose what they're talking about here is the beginning of the world 4.5 billion years ago. Maybe they're not, I don't know. But they seem to have some kind of knowledge of something here when they're talking about the Saturn period. So this all sort of begs the question of, well, how did they know? Did they actually have access to stuff that we don't have access to? This is the mystery. This is what keeps these mysteries going, basically. During the subsequent moon period, the fireball met with a cold atmosphere and developed steam or water. Some of the present angels who had then had human-like consciousnesses identified with water, while there were others that preferred fire. Now, this is where we get into this biblical analogy of Cain and Abel. So the sons of Cain identified with water, and the sons of Abel identified with water. The sons of Cain identified with fire, according to what they believe. Carrying on, repetitive cycles of condensation and evaporation of the moisture surrounding the fiery centre eventually caused incrustation, and it became the purpose of Jehovah to mould this red earth, translated in the Bible as Adam, into forms to imprison and quench the spirits in the fire. To this end, he issued the creative fiat, and the prototypes of fish, fowl, and every living thing appeared, including the primitive human form, all created by his angels. He hoped to make all that lived and moved subservient to his will, but a minority of the angels opposed his plan and rebelled. Now, this is the people who they're saying are the sons of Cain, and basically they describe themselves as the sons of Cain, okay? They had too great an affinity for fire to bear contact with water, and they refused to create the forms as ordered. Thereby they deprived themselves of the opportunity to evolve along conventional lines and became an anomaly in nature. Because they repudiated the authority of Jehovah, they were left to work out their own salvation in their own manner, and they chose for themselves a leader named Lucifer. In the beginning of the Earth period, when various planets were differentiated to provide proper evolutionary environments for each class of spirits, the angels under Jehovah were set to work with the inhabitation of planets, of all planets. Now, derived from Heindel, Max Heindel, Freemasonry and Catholicism, this basically says that the Lucifer spirits were also named the fallen angels, and they had their abode on the planet Mars. So these people align themselves with the planet Mars and fire and the sons of Cain. The angel Gabriel represents Earth and is of the lunar hierarchy and is presided over by Jehovah. The angel Samael is ambassador of the martial forces of Lucifer. Now, I'm going to take a little digression here, because a friend of mine who I think had been invaded by spirits and dark entities and has never quite gotten over it. It's not really her fault. She had a problem, and I think she took drugs and it basically imbibed too much alcohol, and it caused a problem with her psyche, and she got involved with this fake Christian cult. And she told me that the leader of this fake cult was called Samael. And we were in Spain, and as she was talking to me about this is no joke, this actually happened. We were on a dock in Alicante, and there was no one there but a few fishermen and nets. And we stopped, and she said, yeah, and this guy's name was Samael, and I believe he's still got power over me. And we looked down, and painted on the floor was Samael. And it was completely and utterly bizarre, because there was no graffiti anywhere else. Someone had just written Samael at our feet. So whether we believe in this or whether it is some kind of esoteric power, those things are up for debate. But these people, or people who are of this belief, do believe in this. They actually do believe in it. So the feud originated in the dim dawn of this cosmic day between the hierarchs of fire and the hierarchs of water, between the descendants of Cain and those of Abel and Seth, respectively. Okay, so the Masonic legend, according to Heindel, has points of variance from as well as agreement with the Bible story, right? So it concurs with some of the Bible story. It states that Jehovah created Eve and that Lucifer's spirit, Samael, united with her but was ousted by Jehovah and forced to leave her before the birth of her son Cain, who was therefore the son of a widow. Then Jehovah created Adam to be the husband of Eve, and from their union Abel was born. Okay, right. This is quite heavy going, but let's get to the next bit. From the beginning of the earth period, there have been two kinds of people. One, begotten by the Lucifer spirit Samael, and partaking of a semi-divine nature imbued with the dynamic martial energy inherited from this divine ancestor, who is aggressive, progressive, and possessed of great initiative, but impatient of restraint or authority, whether human or divine. This is where the Luciferian doctrine comes in. The other one, the human progeny of human parents, lives by faith and not by deeds, feels neither urge nor unrest, is pliable and docile by nature, an attitude most pleasing to Jehovah because he is extremely jealous. Jehovah is a jealous God. His prerogative as creator. Therefore, he cordially accepts the offering of Abel, obtained without effort or initiative, but scorns the offerings of Cain, derived through his own divine creative instincts, akin to that of Jehovah. Right, so Cain then slew Abel, but did not thereby exterminate the docile creatures of Jehovah, for the Bible tells us that Adam knew Eve again, and she bore Seth, who had the same characteristics as Abel. By arduous and energetic application to the world's work, the sons of Cain acquired worldly wisdom and temporal power. They became captains of industry and masters of statecraft. The sons of Seth, looking to the Lord for guidance, became the avenue for divine and spiritual wisdom. They constitute the priestcraft. That's what it says here. Now, there are those who believe that the reference to the sons of God in Genesis is a reference to the righteous descendants of Seth. Jesus refers to his followers as his brothers and sisters and as sons and daughters of God. So this need not refer to angels. Okay? Now, let's look at Cain and Abel. In the biblical book of Genesis, Cain and Abel are the first two sons of Adam and Eve. Cain, the firstborn, was a farmer, and his brother Abel was a shepherd. The brothers made sacrifices to God, each of his own produce. Right, so they sacrificed their produce to God, but God favoured Abel's sacrifice instead of Cain's. Cain then murdered Abel, whereupon God punished Cain to a lifelong of wandering. Cain then dwelt in the land of Nod, where he built a city and fathered the line of descendants beginning with Enoch. The narrative never explicitly states Cain's motive for murdering his brother, nor God's reason for rejecting Cain's sacrifice, nor details on the identity of Cain's wife. Some traditional interpretations consider Cain to be the originator of evil, violence, or greed. According to Genesis, Cain was the first human born and Abel was the first to die. Let's have a look at the sons of Seth now. Now these people, having kept to the commandments of God, having abstained from the wantonness and lusts of the descendants of Cain, were still to a greater extent close to God's original creation in both physical and spiritual likeness. As time went on, however, they became enamoured of the women of Cain's line and began to intermarry with them. In this way, the righteous was slowly being overcome by the wicked. Now, when Cain killed Abel, let's have a look at this. And the Lord said unto Cain, Where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not. Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground. And now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. While thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth. And Cain said unto the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid. And I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth, and it shall come to pass that every one that findeth me shall slay me. And the Lord said unto him, Therefore, whoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. So this is the stuff that they believe, right? Now, the reason I've gone into all this is that it's rather bizarre because, in a way, it explains what's going on. And I'd read Eustace Mullin's book, The Curse of Canaan, many years ago. And when you look at this legend, and it's not what I believe, I have to keep saying that because it's very important. It's like, used to listen to William Cooper, and it's what he always used to say, this is not what I believe, it's what they believe. And I'm trying to make sense of something that goes back a long way that we can actually put into context of what's happening now. That's why I've gone through all this stuff. Does it fit? Broadly, it does fit with what's going on. From my research, it fits broadly into the picture of what is being formed. This global governance under a priest class that's hidden, but with a lot of puppets out there on the world stage and a lot of useful idiots under it, all basically using Luciferian type principles to get what they want on behalf of their puppet masters. So that starts to make complete sense, and it makes complete sense that the other people, the disempowered people, they see as the sons of Abel because they are water, they are very easy to manipulate. So is that what they believe? It would make sense. It would make sense when you look at what they actually are doing and what they believe. So this is quite heavy going, and it's not the geopolitical stuff that we normally cover, but I think it's incredibly important because when I've looked for this stuff on the internet, I find a lot of allegory. And what we're trying to do here is weave it together into some form of narrative. And that's been the whole goal of a lot of these shows, really, because I don't want to get into doing a weekly kind of news roundup because there's too much of it out there. I refer to all this stuff. It's great. There's loads of people doing it. But I think that the idea of the bigger picture is to get the bigger picture. And so that's my explanation of why we're doing what we're doing. But it goes on here about the mark of Cain. Cain knew his wife and she conceived and she bore Enoch. And he built a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. As Canaan, the land of ancient Israel and Palestine, reinforces the belief that Cain's descendants included those who were of earth, men of great wickedness, and those God wished to destroy with the flood, as in Genesis. Also, the concern of Lot's daughters after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was that there was not a man in the earth to come in unto us after the manner of all the earth. Now this leads me to believe that the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah were a remnant concentration of people of the earth, i.e. descended of Cain and not descended of Seth, because there were other men on the earth after the flood, but their concern was for which kind of men. So in Canaan, there were the Nephilim, also before and after the flood of Noah. That's in Genesis 6:4. The Nephilim were the offspring of fallen angels who are believed to be Cain's descendants. In Numbers, we are told the sons of Anak, spotted by spies for Moses in Canaan, were part of the Nephilim or giants. In Numbers 13:22, we're told that Anak's descendants were in Hebron, and there is mentioned of it being built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. Now, that's funny actually, because I've been to Hebron and you can't imagine anything happening there really. Maybe it did, I don't know. I've got this theory that a lot of these stories have been transplanted, and the place that is in the Middle East at the moment may not be the originator of the stories. That's a totally different issue that we can't get into this week, however, but something that I do find is quite good. Isn't that the name of a lager? What, Hebron? We've got quite a free download. Oh yes, this is great. Sorry, it's from Chris at Reggae Bus. There's a free download of some of the music that we played from Chris, including the track we played tonight at Coffee and Cream, which is www.coffeeankrem.com. Let's say that again, because I found this website quite hard to find. It's a bit hidden, like some of the esoteric knowledge that we've been putting out tonight. Free downloads of songs are available from Chris, and he's on Twitter at Reggae Bus on Twitter. Coffeeandcream.com. So it's KOFEANKREEM.com. It's his record label. So thanks, Chris. I much appreciate your help and the information that you've passed on to us as well. So let's now get into the last bit of the show with the Martinists and Ellis Cohen, Eluscoen, which is a branch of Rosicrucian belief. The Ellis Cohen, sometimes misspelled Ellis Cohen or Cohen as in Cohen. Now, it's interesting because even on their own website, on one of the pages, they spell Cohen as in Cohen. It's the theurgical branch of Order of the Rose Cross, working with Martinez Depasquale's particular form of ceremonial magic that we were talking about earlier on, the world's oldest systematic theurgical order. So basically, this is a magical order of ceremonial magic, and their sort of magic is what we were talking about earlier. Basically, binding demons and keeping them in line, and then doing the same with the good spirits. Well, why not go straight to the good spirits? Why not stay on the right side rather than having to go to the left first? Interesting point. Here the initiate receives a thorough education in a form of theurgy unlike any other Western tradition. That's what the Ellis Cohen and the Martinists state, whilst also studying esoteric classics such as the works of Henrich Cornelius Agrippa, which is basically this guy who was a magician in the Middle Ages, and Peter di Albano. The work is focused on in-depth studies of the order instructions of Pasquale and the mythological framework composing them. Each grade represents one aspect of a divine reality or immensities, similar to the eons of Valentinian Gnosticism. Through labouring oneself and one's perception of existence, utilising magical means, the initiate progresses through a series of purifications to reach the centre of his own and universe's being. So this is all about self-empowerment. And basically, we have to remember that they believe that we are God's perfect creatures. In other words, we are perfection to start with. So they're not looking for perfection, they're looking for, it seems, empowerment. Ironically, they're also looking for immortality. So the belief with this Luciferian system is that they want power on earth, but they also want power after it. I don't know how that quite squares up, but it probably does to them. When the work in one grade is complete, they say, the process of the next begins. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? During the first grades, the Martinist myth is studied, experienced and lived chronologically from the emanation of man, his incarnation into the material world, and eventual calamity of his bodily dissolution. Now, the good side of any of these teachings is that I always thought that they've been part of this elect priest class was about preparing yourself for when you did leave the body. So in other words, making yourself a better person and perfecting yourself, and never stating that you were a perfected human being, which is the statement that they're making. So this is quite interesting. Afterwards begins the path back to the divine immensity through purifications, evocations, invocations, exorcisms, consecrations and talismanic work. You can see how the New Age has fed off this and got it horribly wrong, can't you? These tools serve to process those aspects of ourselves that words cannot express. And Pasquale stressed the importance of the magician, that the magician works both in the waking world by studying his thoughts and reactions, but also with a special form of dream work where the unconscious parts of us must be confronted, redeemed and balanced to our walking life and self. Now, my view is that what a lot of these people are up to is they are creating havoc in dream worlds. And I say that because I've had some experience of it. These people are definitely trying to control people in different levels and states of consciousness. That has been my experience of this kind of doctrine and people who are working it or working under it, because I've had these experiences and people I know have had these experiences. I know somebody who was actually targeted because they were working with me, and they were told to go and see a healer. And the healer said to them, after 5 days, if you do not get better, we will come to you in your dreams. And after 5 days, I got a phone call in the middle of the night where a friend of mine stated that he'd had a lucid dream where he was walking through some trees, birds singing, etc. Lovely, all nice, forest, great scenery. Slowly getting darker and darker and darker and darker. He ended up with octagonal shape of hooded figures surrounding him, coming in on him, basically suffocating him to death, at which point he woke up. And 5 days after that, he had a similar experience, and he trained himself to stay awake during these experiences and basically frightened it off. I kid you not. I think these things do happen. However, I don't think that they have that much power. Because if you have strong power within yourself, spiritual power, I'm not talking about the power they're talking about, it usurps it. I do believe that. And the only way that they can get to you, if they really need to, is if you've got some damage in your psyche, or you've been taking drink or drugs to excess. These are open gateways to possession. And possession obviously is much more serious than just attachment or having these dreamlike experiences, which I would describe as basically projected lucid dreams. Now, when you start getting into the real meat and potatoes of this, it's about the outer body experience, and that is your consciousness projecting itself. And you are able to see 360 degrees, and everything is much clearer than it is in this particular dimension that we're in at the moment. And that is, I believe, what these people are trying to attain. But in my view, they're attaining it in completely back to front way. It appears to me. I don't know what they think, but I'm sort of relaying what they're stating in their documents. So that must be what they think, I suspect. So it says, in the theurgical work, all phenomena are therefore perceived as aspects or emanations of the eternal in direct relation to one's self. Man is an immortal being of spirit, finding himself in abode of mortality, both spiritually and materially. Our material lives are obvious, but those parts of our inner life that manifest as angels or demons. Wait a minute. Our material lives are obvious, but those parts of our inner life that manifest as angels or demons, so they're already talking about possession here, are seen as dualities of the soul. Well, the whole point of this ability to project consciousness is that there is no duality of the soul. They're talking about duality of the person. They're talking basically about conflict here, in my view, having an unconscious influence on how we perceive ourselves. They're talking about how to have an unconscious influence on how to perceive ourselves. Again, I think we're talking here about the subconscious, or they're talking about the subconscious, which is not what I would suggest is what the projection of consciousness it actually is, because we're talking about thought forms and things that are imprinted on our subconscious mind, which is not our consciousness in my view. So the tradition of Pasquale was revived after the Second World War, but since then it has existed a great confusion regarding the Ellis Cohen, ranging from how the very name of the order was spelled to how its system of initiation was composed. Robert Amberlane was convinced that the order represented a priesthood of the Old Testament, the Levitic Kohanim, that supervised the cult of the temple in Jerusalem. He further filled the many holes in the tradition he sought to revive with either Kabbalah or foreign elements from Memphis Mizraim. The full title of Pasquale's order is Ordens de Chevalier Machons Ellis Cohen Le Univers. He chose the name Ellis Cohen's to mean the eternal co-eternal, from the French co-eternal, pointing towards the ultimate purpose and goal for the order. The name also has another implication, reserved for those who have attained the 7th degree. They have 7 degrees in this, of course, number 7 being a sacred number for the Rosicrucians. As with the oldest manifestation of the Martinez tradition, the Order Rose Cross worked Pasquale's original system of 7 degrees, bearing little or no resemblance with Amberlane's reconstruction from the 1940s, and can in no way be considered an Old Testament tradition. Okay, that's interesting, isn't it? Throughout its initiations, the seeker works within the mythology of both the Old and New Covenant, striking to attain Henosis and Uno Mystica. The Ellis Cohen is, on the other hand, deeply rooted in Judeo-Christian symbolism. Now, I've got a bit of a problem here because you can't have Judeo-Christian, and this to me is a red herring that's just been thrown in, but with what we today might call Valentinian Gnostic traces, as we find them in Pasquale's own texts, rituals and catechisms. Ellis Cohen originally had 7 initiations, subdivided into 11 degrees. This has led to some misconception to the structure of his system, such as the first degree were identical to traditional Freemasonry, or that being a regular Freemason was a requirement in order to be received into the order. Now, you can only get into this order of Ellis Cohen if you are a Martinist, I believe. Have a look at what it says on their website. Though the degrees have an outer name that resembles or is inspired by what today is known as the traditional French rite, this is not so at all. The sub-degrees of the system are, in other words, not separate initiations but symbolic stages of one and the same ceremony. So that's their idea of perfection, you see. Now, the source of these teachings is shrouded in the antiquities of history. It's getting very Rosicrucian again, isn't it? But was conceived and shaped into a coherent philosophy and spiritual school by 3 distinct individuals. We've just named. That was Martinez Depasquale, Louis Claude de Saint Martin, and Jean-Baptiste Villamos. We've already mentioned them. So, I don't know what to make of all this stuff sometimes, apart from what I've said, and absolutely fascinating stuff to look at. It carries on, though, through the language of myth, of experience, rather than words. The tradition seeks to tell that all men in the time before time was in a state of perfect clarity, self-understanding, gnosis, rest and harmony that now seems lost, but still persists in the sacred silence in the hearts of all men and women. Now, that's a really powerful paragraph there, and I would concur with most of that. In other words, that there was a time when we were better. I wouldn't say perfect, but I would say we were better than we were. In other words, I think our sixth sense has been shut down. These people are in some reckless, in my view, this is my view, in some reckless way, they're trying to empower themselves. in this rush for power, what they've done is cut themselves off from the true source of spirituality. Now, I would like to get some argument with that, if anyone can put something forward in future shows, because this is the conclusion that I've come up with, that these people have actually cut themselves off from the true source, and they're using a Luciferian belief to enforce their power and control on everybody else. And that is a roundabout and easy way of summing up the last couple of hours, I think. I hope it's been quite clear, because I put a lot of work into how I was going to do it. It was a very difficult subject to get hold of, because once you start going off into these different sects and cults, it becomes rather confusing. But when we draw together this story of Cain and Abel and Seth and put it together with their belief system, it does seem to fit. It fits into what's going on at the moment. It fits this present order. So it's very useful to have these allegorical exercises, really, these ways of looking at things. Is this what they believe? Is this what they believe behind the curtain? I think is a very good chance it is. I've talked to some of these people over the years. I've been rather confused as to some of their motivations, because there is a belief in these secret societies and not so secret societies, because they're all named, including, of course, things like the Knights of Malta, the Knights Hospitaller, the Knights Templar, etc. It's all about this illumination. And when we look at it now, we can see what their present belief is. Maybe this wasn't always their belief, but of course the Knights Templar got accused of divination of the dead. They basically got accused of necromancy, worshipping Baphomet, the disembodied head of John the Baptist. I mean, this all ties into black magic, really. Once you start worshipping relics and bones, then you're getting into necromancy. It's a cult of death, basically using people from beyond the grave who do not want to be controlled and controlling them. This is the essence of a lot of the teachings of the so-called Roman Church, in that even one of the popes was lined with lead. There was lead put into his coffin. His coffin was lined with lead in the belief that his soul could not escape. Now, what sort of mentally ill doctrine drives this stuff? It's certainly nothing to do with the early Christianity. It's got nothing to do with what's in the New Testament, I don't think. It has certain similarities with the Old Testament and with sacrifice, etc., and what we've been talking about tonight. But there you go. This is it, the Sons of Cain. So we've kind of gone into that. And I really couldn't work a lot of this stuff out for quite a few years, because it all seemed rather fragmented. But once you align this Kabbalistic view along with their biblical view, it becomes quite obvious. Then you bring in the Luciferianism. It all starts to come together. And it comes together in a very interesting way, and it comes together in a way which is actually very clear. So I hope that's been useful tonight, in that it kind of locks in this present order which we're under, which makes sense in a corporate way when we see the front end of it, and without going into sort of the ancient mystery schools and the Egyptians and the endless droning on of things that never get to the point. Putting it in this framework does seem to work. So there you go. That's the result of many hours of research and trying to put something very allegorical and fragmented together into a narrative, and trying to explain that narrative, explain what these people are believing. What is it they're believing? I mean, the whole thing of the necromancy cult is very important to them, obviously. If you look on the websites of these orders, you will see that they have skulls there. They have skulls on black robes. They have black sashes with skulls with 5 daggers going through on one of them. Allegedly, this could be a Rothschild influence. I've no idea about whether it is or not, but we know that one of the Rothschilds at least was part of this Martinez order. Well, it would be very surprising if they weren't. So that's interesting. I've no idea about the the symbology of that with the 5 daggers, but that's part of the symbology. So would you dress up in black with a white robe over it with red cuffs, put a sash around your neck with a skull on it with 5 daggers going through it, and then try and raise the dead? Well, I don't think I would. I wouldn't be interested in doing anything like that, and I certainly wouldn't do it because it's against my own principles and against what I believe in. But is it what they believe in? I think there's a very good chance it is. So there you go. Good. I'm glad you're having a chat in the chat box there. And thanks everybody for listening. We're going to get back to more down-to-earth matters next week, I suspect. I'm going to be at the Harlequin Fair doing talks next Sunday. Next Sunday at the Harlequin Fair, we're going to be doing The Bigger Picture. So if you look up the Harlequin Fair, which is at a secret location somewhere in the northeast section of the middle part of England. have a look that up, and we should be having some fun up there. Hopefully the weather will be good. I remember last year we did our show which was about getting banned from the green gathering. Me and Piers Corbyn was sat outside in deck chairs talking about, well, gloating over the fact we'd been banned from the awful green gathering and their Luciferian doctrine. Only joking, or am I? No, they're just useful idiots, really. However, so that's it for this week, and thanks for listening. We'll be here next week, 9 p.m, Windows on the World, and good night to everybody. Thanks for being in chat, and remember to tell your friends about us on Spreaker, because we may not be on YouTube forever. Thanks and good night. Welcome to Windows on the World. I want to keep bringing our listeners well-researched and useful information. Please consider sponsoring our work by going to windowsontheworld.net and clicking the donate button.